Aloha students, this is Mr. Carter and I have a very special lecture for you today in the form of a video of a lecture that I actually gave in 2020. And this was something that was done during the heart of the very first shutdown that we had in Hawaii due to the COVID pandemic. And at that time, I was teaching only from home. There was no in-person classes. And so I often spent time making videos and PowerPoints to be able to, liven up the online classes that I had with my students. And since just a few weeks ago, on April 25th, we had the Rogation Days. I remember this PowerPoint that I had made last year, and I thought it was appropriate to, share this with you because it is an extremely important part of our church history. It's also an important part of our sacramental worldview as Catholics. And even though you know, it was even more appropriate during 2020, we are not yet out of the pandemic. We are not yet out of the not only physical, but also the emotional, financial, hardships of the pandemic. And so studying the Rogation Days, which we're about to do, is very appropriate for us even today. And those of you who have been my students for a while know that I love ancient traditions. You're going to hear me say that in the video coming up. And so I thought it would be appropriate to share it. Now, I know this year I'm a about a week and a half late in sharing this particular video because the Rogation Days happened about a week and a half ago, or rather, the major Rogation happened about a week and a half ago. But we still have the minor rogations coming up, and I thought that it would be appropriate to share this video with you. And I'm very grateful that I found it. It was in my Google Drive, and it took me a while to find it. I was even looking for the slides, just the slides themselves, to see if I could just redo the video. But I was able to find that video, and I thought that I could just do a little bit of an introduction and then go ahead and let the video I made last year, play. And so here is a lecture about the historical Rogation Days.
Okay, so for today, I want to go over a very special day that we just had in our church, not even 2 days ago. It was actually on Saturday. It was the Rogation Days. And the Rogation Days, much like the Ember Days, which we have discussed in the past in former classes, the Rogation Days are a set of days that are a part of a tradition that has been lost in our church. And all my students know I'm a big fan of ancient traditions in the church. Many of these traditions that have been lost are still very good for us, still very holy things to observe and understand. And whether or not they are mandatory or obligatory, no matter if the church says we need to follow them, each year or not, it's still a good thing to know about them. And so many of you know about the Ember Days um, that we celebrate throughout the year. And then we have the Rogation Days. And you can see a picture there from a long time ago. It's a painting of a Rogation Day procession. And then the Bible verse I have there, ask and it shall be given you, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open unto you. And that's actually taken from the Gospel of Luke. That's the gospel reading of the day during the Rogation Mass. The Rogation Mass no longer exists in our normal calendar, but if you go to the traditional Latin Mass, the 1962 Missal, which is still acknowledged by our church and is followed by many people, the Rogation Mass is in that calendar. And so I just want to kind of go over this since we just went through the Rogation Days, or we just passed the Rogation Day this past April 25th. All right, so the Catholic Encyclopedia states that the Rogation Days are days of prayer, formerly also of fasting, instituted by the church to appease God's anger at man's transgressions, to ask protection in calamities, and to obtain a good and bountiful harvest. So, what we'll see here is that the Rogation Days has a multifold purpose. One of the purposes, as we'll see here in just a minute, is that it was a day set aside to ask God to, help countries or communities during times of calamities, during times of hurricanes and natural disasters and things like that. We'll see why here in a minute, why one of the popes or one of the bishops of a very specific area wanted to institute the Rogation Days a long time ago in order to protect his diocese, to protect his community. And then also, just like the Ember Days, it's also days set aside to pray and ask God for a good and bountiful harvest. You see, back then, back a long time ago, we were very rural, very agrarian. And so good harvest was important for the survival of the entire community, for the survival of entire countries sometimes. It wasn't dependent on industry and processing and things like that. It was truly based on whether or not you had a bountiful harvest. And so the Rogation Days for uh, a long time were an extremely important part of the church calendar for farmers and for all of those who, subsided off of the land. All right, Rogation Days. Now, there are 4 Rogation Days throughout the year. There's one day referred to as the Major Rogation, and that's what we just finished. That was on April 25th. That's known as the Major Rogation. And on April 25th, there are many different litanies and prayers that are said, and blessings upon farmlands and blessings upon parishes, followed by a Mass. And then there are 3 minor rogations, which are celebrated on the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday immediately before Ascension Thursday. And as you know, Ascension is when our Lord went to heaven, and it was 40 days after he resurrected from the dead. So this year, 2020, we'll be celebrating the Ascension on, I believe it's May 21st. That means the minor rogations would take place on May 18th, 19th, and 20th of this year. So that's coming up. And so when those days come up, you'll know what days they are, whether they're on the calendar or not. They still are Rogation Days. And you can remember that and maybe say some extra prayers on those days. Now, the word rogation is an English form of the Latin word rogatio, which comes from the verb rogare, which means to ask. And so, really, the Rogation Days are asking days. That's really what it means. It means days of asking. And in this specific circumstance, or in the liturgical circumstance throughout history, it was the days on which we ask God to bless the fields and the parish. Now, back in the day, parishes didn't just refer specifically to like the parish you belong to, like, St. Michael Parish or Blessed Sacrament Parish or Our Lady of Sorrows Parish. It wasn't that at all. It was a geographic area. So, for example, I lived in Jamaica for a while, and in Jamaica, whichever the parish was, like I remember there was a parish named St. Anne, and I actually went to that church every Sunday while I was in Jamaica. But the entire town, the entire area was known as St. Anne's Parish. So it was the geographic, it's basically the name of the town. The name of the town didn't have any other name besides St. Anne's Parish. All right. So back in the day, parishes didn't just refer to the name of your church. It actually referred to your geographic location, as in your town. All right. So the Rogation Days back in the day were a days to ask God to bless the fields, the farmlands, and the parish, the geographical area that they fall in. And so I did some research, and you could actually find some pictures of painted pictures from a long time ago of rogation processions. You see, on Rogation Days, priests and the parish, the parishioners, would process around their town and process around farmlands, doing the litany of the saints and asking special blessings on their geographical area, as in like their town, as well as any farmlands. And so here's one picture I found, and I think I have one more here. Yeah, and here's the one that I had on that first slide. Another picture from a long time ago of a Eucharistic procession. You can see right there. You can see the monstrance right there. Well, it's either a monstrance or it might be a reliquary. It's possible he was processing with a relic of a saint, but most likely because it looks like he has a humor veil on, and because of all the candles and because of the canopy, it's most likely a monstrance that they were processing with, as in with with the body, blood, soul, and divinity, the real presence of Christ. And so those are two pictures I found that were painted a long time ago, and it was a painting of the Rogation Day procession. Now, the observance of the Rogation Days owes its origin to a variety of calamities that befell the city of Vienne and Daphne. Now, calamity, if you don't know, the word calamity is like a disaster, right? Like a natural disaster, like an earthquake, like a tsunami, a hurricane, things like that. That's a calamity. It's a natural disaster. And there was a place in Vienne, in Daphne, that for half a century, not 1 year, not even a season passed without a brand new calamity occurring in that area. All right, so this is back around the 5th century. They just kept getting calamity after calamity. And so on Easter night in 469, Bishop Mamertus of Vienne made a vow to institute the, quote, rogations, end quote. The rogations are litanies or supplications. Supplications is to ask, right? Which consist in solemn procession accompanied with public fast and prayer. So as you can see, the Rogation Days aren't a brand new thing at all. It's actually very old. And the earliest record we have of it is of Bishop Mamertus in 469, instituting the rogations in order that they might ask God to end the onslaught of calamities that they were facing. I would say that maybe this past Saturday would have been a good day for us to process on this Rogation Day, on that Rogation Day this year, for us to ask God to stop this COVID-19 pandemic, right? Hey, maybe that's something we can do coming up on the minor rogations that are going to happen on May 18th, 19th, and 20th. We can ask God to help put an end or to stop this pandemic and all of the calamity that is befalling us, not only the loss of life, but also economic disaster and financial hardships. So perhaps we have a reason to reinstitute the processions this year, right? And then by the time of St. Pope Gregory the Great, around the mid 5th century, mid 6th century, going into the 7th century, the Rogation Days were considered a perennial custom, as in by the time of Pope St. Gregory the Great, the entire church in the West were practicing the Rogation Days. It wasn't only in Vienne anymore, it was all over the Western Church. In the Roman Catholic Church, the Rogation Days were acknowledged and were practiced all on the same day, April 25th, which happens to now be the Feast of St. Mark. It doesn't have a connection to that feast day though. But April 25th, the Rogation Days were celebrated for centuries and centuries and centuries, every April 25th, and then every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before Ascension Thursday. All right, so again, by the mid 6th century, it was kind of already commonplace, and everyone did it. Now, specifically, the Rogation Days were marked by the recitation of the Litany of Saints, which we have all heard before. The entire parish would be blessed. And we're talking about, I'm getting this, of course, all from the Catholic Encyclopedia. So when I mean parish, I mean geographical location, not just the church itself. And the boundaries of the parish would be marked. The procession would end with a Rogation Mass in which all in the parish were expected to take part. And so this would happen again on April 25th, and then again on the minor Rogation Days leading up to Ascension Thursday. And they would bless the entire geographical area. So that would be like, you know, let's say you live in Wailua, which is where St. Michael's is. If you lived in Wailua, the procession and the continual recitation of the Litany of Saints would be done throughout all of Wailua, not just around St. Michael's Parish, right? But like the entire geographical location. And then it was expected that everyone that lived in Wailua would eventually come to the Rogation Mass to ask God to bless the entire town and to give us bountiful harvest. And just so you know, this did continue much after, the early centuries and mid-centuries. We have pictures here. I believe this picture is from either the late 50s or the early 60s. It was still a regular practice everywhere. And so this is a picture of a Rogation procession on, I believe this one was on April 25th. I'm not sure where it is, but this was part of the major Rogation Day when they would process around. And you notice they're not just processing around their church here, they're processing all around the area because they're going to process around their whole geographic location. And then here's yet another one. I believe this is a photographer, actually. Maybe not. It looks like he's wearing a surplice there. I'm not too sure. But here's the priest, and it looks like they might be actually, it looks like they might be taking a picture right before they leave for uh, their Rogation procession. And so you can see, way after the earliest centuries, there was, still this procession. So it's not something that was just way a long time ago. It's something that still happened in recently modern times. In fact, some of our grandparents or maybe great grandparents who are still alive can probably remember going through the Rogation procession. You might want to ask them about that because it was something that was part of everyday life or every year, every liturgical year life. Now, what I really like, I read through my own missal because I do have a 1962 missal. I go to a parish in our diocese that does a traditional Latin Mass. It's the only parish in our diocese that has it. And so we used a 1962 missal. And so I read through mine today. And it's really beautiful in the gospel reading for that day. In Luke, it has the most it has the absolute perfect gospel for it, and that's the Gospel of Luke, where you have Jesus saying, "And I say to you, ask and it shall be given to you; seek and you shall find; knock and it shall be open unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be open." What a perfect gospel reading for a Rogation Day. Rogation coming from the word rogare, which means to ask. It is a perfect gospel because we are reminded that when we pray and when we ask God for something, if it be in his will, he will answer. And in fact, I'll take it a step further. God always answers prayer. Whether or not the answer is the one we want to hear is a different question. But what a perfect gospel reading on the Rogation Days for the gospel. Now, like the Ember Days, Rogation Days are removed from the normal liturgical calendar when it was revised in 1969. Again, if you follow the 62 Missal, which the Roman Catholic Church allows us to do if we follow the extraordinary form of the Mass, it's still part of our calendar. But if you follow the new calendar, it is no longer in there. However, parishes are still completely allowed to celebrate them, but very few in the United States follow it. However, there are places throughout Europe that do the Rogation Days, and especially the major Rogation. And so they at least process on the major Rogation Day, which is April 25th. And that does exist throughout Europe still. Even if they're not following the old calendar, they still do it on April 25th. And here's a picture. I believe this is the Institute of Christ the King. I don't believe this one's in the US. I believe this is somewhere in Europe. But this is an order that's still active. It's a beautiful order that was founded, I believe, by St. John Paul II that follows the old calendar. And this is them. I believe this is from 2018. It's not that old, where they are processing on the Rogation Days. So I think this is very beautiful. It looks like most of them back here, these are all seminarians, if I'm not mistaken, and they are processing on the April 15th, the major Rogation. So even though it's not something that you see frequently, it still does exist. And there are at least pockets of the Roman Catholic Church, the Western Church, that still practice it. Now, because it's not mandatory, very few people do it. And in fact, there's a lot of priests probably that don't even know what the Rogation Days are. However, if they don't, and it's not something that they're going to practice, it doesn't mean that you can't celebrate it yourself. And so you could do things like on the major Rogation on April 15th, and then April 25th, sorry, and then the days leading up to specifically the Ascension Thursday, you can recite the Litany of the Saints on your own, go to mass for that day, and then pray for good weather, for bountiful harvest for our farmers, and maybe even, walk around your town and pray for your town. So you can still remember this very beautiful tradition of the Rogation Days, whether or not it's, whether it's remembered by your parish priest or your parish in general. It's still something that you can do on your own as a Catholic.